Barry Mehr. I want to give you a little bit of background because it's bound to come up and maybe it's appropriate to kick it off this way. The recommendations are a first. I've been instrumental in conducting these surveys and hosting discussions, but in this case, webinars about the survey, but never with regard to deriving recommendations. Because a survey in its origins in 2015 through the Alberta Council of Technologies, and it's been a standard survey launched every season, that is now in October for discussion and release of results in November, and in April for discussion and release in May. It never was intended to derive recommendations. It was meant to be like a weather report. We conduct a survey. The survey is a sentiment survey. I'll explain why it's sentiment oriented in a moment. But the intent was to simply put that information out that people could digest it and become more familiar with the concept of economic diversification and resilience, more familiar with what others are thinking about when they assess and assume what the role of government might be, becoming familiar, and this was a clear contribution, becoming more familiar with what an innovation ecosystem is or might be. And I can share with you now, in the early days, in the first 3 or 4 years, every time we surveyed about the innovation ecosystem, there were lots of questions about, well, what is it? Those questions are few and far between now. I think people are much more familiar with what it is as the nutrition, if you will, for small businesses to conceive, to grow, to survive, to stay. So this is really the first, the drafting of recommendations, and the recommendations stem not just from the data, but from the discussions that have taken place in the last month and before the survey itself, where the focus over the last 2 months has been about Alberta's economic resilience. The number of participants sometimes ranges as high as 400 and sometimes as low as 100. What's interesting is how consistent the data is on things like the role of government. How consistent, rather than a lot of spiking, we get from season to season. There is a little bit of a damper in the fall and a little bit more growth oriented and positiveness in the spring. But by and large, the data has been pretty consistent, demonstrating gradual progress on every front, unless the price of oil or something like COVID hits. So the survey data, and that is the sentiment of people that reply, because that's really what we're measuring, is people's moods or feelings or viewpoints, seem to give us a pretty good measure that's reflective, in Alberta at least, of what's going on in the oil industry. And that seems to echo one of the concerns that we had when we kicked this all off, and that is an over-reliance on a single industry that was volatile. And as a consequence, Alberta suffered that boom and bust cycle. So that was the origin, an attempt to keep focus on diversification, learn a little bit, share it, and hopefully trigger some recommendations and action. Well, that's what we put together for you today. So that's a rather extended background, but hopefully that's helpful for everybody and puts the focus more on the recommendations than on the survey itself. But I will be available should Barry want to direct any questions to me about its origins and how it's conducted. So Barry, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to make a few introductory comments, and then let's get down to the meat of why we're here. Some things around the study, Perry's talked about, some things of value are done because people care. And the reason I'm involved is Perry cares. He has cared and had time and resources to devote to what he cared about, to research and learn about and contribute to meaningful change. The study is his baby, and it goes back to, as he says, 2015, and twice a year. And so I will be looking for him to interject with with comments. How is it resourced? It's resourced by Perry. That's the other reason I'm involved, because it is an independent look at the mood of people. It's not something some political party, or after 35 years in government, some government came up with. It's that maybe he doesn't have that kind of identifier on it. It's a measurement of moods, and and not really a measurement of statistics. And yet it seems to most of the time dovetail to statistics. And I know when I was employed utilizing studies, and Brian, you're the one that can shoot me down on this one if I'm wrong. We always found that when we talk about the economy, the mood of the public was the most important factor to be aware of, because it would drive what would happen in the future. And so therefore, I will try to get the discussion to focus on the future potential uses for the study's outputs. And this whole area of recommendations is and I'll take a little bit of the blame for them being, having been drafted. The study has come up with outcomes, it's come up with data, but no indication of something, it driving something like a more cohesive and trusted approach to economic development than what we had when I was in government, and what we have today, I don't think has improved much. So with that, I would comment, as I commented to our three presenters, Perry's going to encourage the viewers to use the chat function to send him comments and or questions. Then I will ask each of you presenters to introduce yourselves and your interests on the topic of an open discussion with a comment and a question. From there, I will encourage you to interact as a group in sharing your views as I draw attention to the content of the attached draft recommendations about Alberta's economic resilience, the role of government, and the effectiveness of the innovation ecosystem. I was saying earlier before we were all on, we all have big biases, and we're not asking anybody to apologize for them. I'm going to try very hard not to share mine, because that's not why I'm here. But I will hide mine, but we need to hear from all of you, including you, Perry, yours, and how can this survey serve your passions around our economic potentials. From the survey, we've come up with a statement that seems to fit, but we may find out that doesn't fit at all by the end of the day. Alberta will facilitate and lead Canada in the development of a superior place that is a united and strong, tolerant and sustainable place to live and learn, work and play. And then those managing what comes out of the study, one of them things is those managing the ecosystem are responsible for addressing the ecosystem's weakest elements. And the study shows that the weakest elements are management processes and a sustained vision and leadership. And my commitment today is we will use chat, and Perry will handle that, and we will be done by 3:30. Let me just introduce the three key panelists. I knew there was a right word. And the first one is Justin Riemer. Justin, hi, and it's wonderful to be working with you again. Justin and I worked together, and it was just a great experience. Today, somebody has convinced him he should move up the ladder, and he's the Assistant Deputy Minister with Western Economic Diversification. Justin is working to diversify the economy while improving the quality of life of Western Canadians. Lyn Brown of now Alberta Innovates. Lyn, I think we probably missed each other career-wise by a few months at the old AITF Alberta Innovate, now Alberta Innovates. Lyn is the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Alberta Innovates. By seeing beyond the possible, Alberta Innovates solves some of the biggest industry challenges. They support research, the growth of business, and help the startup community. That's a huge challenge. And Leann Hackman-Carty. Leann has been the CEO of the Economic Developers of Alberta since 2009. EDA is the leading economic development network in Alberta. It includes municipalities, towns, regions, tourism groups, financial institutions, crown corporations, businesses, regional and economic development authorities, and community futures development corporations. So we've got all, as Perry has said, all three levels of government, the expertise around the table. And the purpose of this is not to have you try and put forward a formal position from either who you represent or how, but to stir us up into a discussion of is an independent driven survey twice a year of the economic future, and is it worthwhile for the economy and help the economy to move in a positive way rather than a negative way. So we'd like to hear from you. I would ask Justin to start it off. Justin, you just turn it over to Lyn, and Lyn to Leann. And at the beginning, I've just glossed over your background, so please give us a little bit more information so we can get excited and look forward to a good discussion. So thanks, and Justin, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Barry. First, I have to say it's a pleasure to be here. Perry, thanks so much for the invitation. Barry, great to see you again. I don't know if most of you know, but Barry was one of my first deputy ministers and took a chance on me and gave me all kinds of opportunities, and he's a big mentor in my life. So it's an honor to be here presenting and discussing with you today. And I'm not coming to you today as the representative from WD, but as a passionate fourth generation Albertan who deeply loves economic development. and I've been doing economic development for 25 years in this province. I spent about 23 years with the province, the government of Alberta, doing economic development alongside Barry, alongside Brian, alongside a number of colleagues I see on the line and friendly faces. Nice to see John Sproul here as well today, who I've learned a lot about the health system with and had a lot of fun there. But John, I'm glad I'm doing economic development right now. So, it just really appreciate, as Barry said, that all of you care about this province, and it shows by showing up at events like this and discussing things like this. And I'm just like you, I care too, and have been concerned deeply this past year with a lot of the big net impacts that Alberta has suffered, not only because of COVID, but because of the oil and gas transformation. We can't call it a downturn anymore. It is complete and utter transformation that the sector is going in. And our sector and the transformation that is undergoing in this economy is profound. So I'm excited to play a role, and I'm excited to play a role with resources. It's fun. It's more fun doing economic development when you have funding than when you do economic development without funding. I can tell you that. I've tried both scenarios.
I'd agree.
And I'm sure some of you can recognize that. But the trick is how to invest wisely, right? And that's where I'd really like to have some back and forth today with all of you and your sage wisdom as to where we need to be investing, where are the gaps, where are the dysfunctions. You can argue about the role of government in the economy, and a lot of you would have differing views, but make no mistake, government has a massive role in the economy right now, whether we like it or not. The amount of investment and areas of focus are such that we have to grapple with that, and we have to make choices with respect to that. And that's a big role which I'm seized with right now in determining investments in a number of different areas. Moving to the recommendations and to the study that was developed, I resonated with a number of pieces with it. I'd be happy to talk to you about energy transition. We've been investing a lot in hydrogen as one of those, I'd say, medium long-term plays. It's certainly not a short-term play, but I do think there's opportunity for heavy vehicles and freight fueling in this province in particular, probably a better opportunity than just about anywhere in Canada because we make so much of it already. So there's lots of opportunities in there, but that's not going to be the silver bullet for the energy transition by any stretch of the imagination. So there's a lot of other areas that are being focused on. And I think coupling Alberta's oil and gas expertise, we are the ones to take the cudgel of the new transition of the energy sector and find new businesses and supports in that area. And would love to hear your advice and questions around how do we do that effectively. Skills for the future is another big area of importance. We haven't always looked at skill development, typically in economic development. That whole talent management is actually a gap within government. Everyone knows it's important. No one's responsible for it. And that's something that's got to change from my perspective in government. We have to have a much longer term horizon on skills for the future and making sure we're equipping our students for that. We've been investing at WD a lot into work integrated learning and how we can influence that. So co-op programs and real life experience for students, that's going to be one way in which we educate our workforce for the future, but also really important to retain talent and the youth in our province. Alberta's never had to worry for a long, long time about retaining youth and talent until now. We're actually seeing Alberta age right now. We're seeing a mass exodus of youth that we haven't seen in a long time because of the diminished opportunities in the energy sector, because of opportunities elsewhere, and quite frankly, our acrimonious, toxic political environment that we have. People have just had it and said, "I'm out of here," and are going elsewhere. You're spending a year locked in your home. You realize winter's maybe not as fun as you thought it was when you had opportunities to do things, and we're seeing a lot of people go to BC and other places. So it's a problem, and it's a serious problem that we have to do something about, because you cannot grow an economy without talent. And so the talent focus is a big area for us, and we're doing a big study with the Canada West Foundation on that right now. I love the recommendations around procurement and public procurement. It's an area that I've banged my head against the wall for about 23 years in terms of trying to get changes implemented. There's so much power that could be leveraged in terms of innovative procurement methods by government. If they could just get beyond the sort of management ethos around that sort of perpetuates that area right now in terms of looking at doing things in a different way. I'd point to one success we had recently. I was helping to advise on this. Mayor Nenshi in Calgary launched an innovation challenge most recently through procurement for the city of Calgary. We need to see more stuff like that. We need to see government putting out challenges to the community and asking them to help solve those challenges and using public dollars to leverage that. And there's all kinds of ways you can do things there. Nice to see some innovative P3 approaches by the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, and we need to see more of that type of activity into the future as well. And then I'll just comment on the NGOs. That's all I deal with in many instances is NGOs. There's a plethora of them in the province. And part of my role, and others on this call with me, other panelists, it's to align those ecosystem players and to make sure we're pulling in the same direction and enabling allows not-for-profits not to compete with one another or duplicate services, but to leverage their collective horsepower to achieve some substantive outcomes. And so really keen on ideas in which we can support that and ways in which we as funders, say the provincial, federal, and municipal governments, can incent NGOs that we fund to do the right thing and work together and collaborate and achieve larger outcomes together rather than just as independent silos. So perhaps I'll just leave it at that, Barry.
Thank you.
Lyn.
Yeah, Lyn.
Yes, thank you, Barry, and it's great to join this conversation. I'll pass along, first of all, Laura's regret that she couldn't be here, but she's certainly going to be paying attention to the continued discussions, Perry and Barry, that you're facilitating. So let me just share a few sort of a little bit of background. I'm Alberta born and educated, born and raised. I grew up middle kid in a farm family, 5 sisters, no brothers, back up in near Lac La Biche in northern Alberta. Got my start as a community newspaper journalist and then made the shift to business. And I've bounced around a little bit, so I'm a little bit, an inch deep and a mile wide as a social scientist, perhaps drawn by the social science aspects of change, transition, and transformation. I've worked with the PEGA, I've worked in the utilities, I've worked in the postal services. So I've had an opportunity to, experience personally the wrenching sort of experience of a shift that is sometimes triggered by one's own desires, but sometimes as a result of externalities. I was at AGT when it privatized in 1990, was a $1 billion, perhaps Alberta's first unicorn, I don't know. But it was heady days in the telecommunications industry. And I know that it was part of a strategy that the province deployed at that time because of a fiscal challenge that Albertans were facing. Before I sort of dive into the recommendations, I do want to share a story from 1996. And it comes from a very different field of play than economics, but I think it's both instructive and interesting for a couple of reasons. It was back in August, and a lot of us were glued to our televisions because it was the Summer Olympics in Atlanta. And it was the year that Canadian sprinter Donovan Bailey and 3 Jamaican Canadians did the unexpected. They, against all odds, beat a powerhouse US sprinting squad and brought home the gold in the 4x100 men's relay. It was thrilling. It wasn't perfect. There were missteps in the qualifying run, and they had a fender bender on the way to the final race. So, when you're coming into the Olympics and you just came out of that circumstance, you can imagine the mental pressure. One of the things, though, that experts have said is that it wasn't their speed, it was their execution in the transition zones that gave them the edge. Each of them by themselves, Bailey, Surin, Gilbert, Esme, was a fierce competitor as a solo sprinter, but they had to set those individual rivalries aside in order to win that relay. And when Gilbert was interviewed about 20 years later, he said, what you saw at the end of that race was a team that was connected and ready on the field of play. So takeaways, one, Alberta innovators, two, need sometimes to set aside their individual rivalries to gain an edge in that global field of play. Two, we're living in a borderless economy, and it's being shaped by kids who weren't even born in 1996. And the third takeaway from that comes really from what Todd Hirsch shared in his comments a bit earlier in this series, when he said that the $1 trillion or trillions in wealth transfer on the horizon will be going into the hands of people who care about the direction and quality of GDP, not only its rate of growth. So to add to that, out of a recent Boston Consulting Group study, they estimated that women's investable wealth is in the range of 72 trillion. To ignore these social dimensions, I think when we get into discussions of economic development, leaves us with a bit of a blind spot when we consider the future prospects of the province. And so if I could offer, a thought or two about the recommendations, I think it's a great place to start. I think it's fed by, people passionate about this province. And I would just ask whether it's as diverse and inclusive as the future will demand as we continue to move forward. From an Alberta Innovates perspective, the transition zones of that relay race really strike home for us because we're working end to end in the innovation system. Everything from in partnership with the research universities that deep research, entrepreneurial startup arena, all the way through to venture development, and then with our applied research teams, the industry pull through that you see within the mature sectors, whether it's big oil transitioning now to big energy in a very different sort of energy arena, or health, or the resource industries, whether it's forestry or agriculture. So for us, that transition, the interdisciplinary and the interconnectedness of the system, all really are factors that both propel and sometimes slow us down. And again, Justin and others, Barry, Perry, I'm sure you have personal sort of views on how that has been evolving over the years. I will say that I left Alberta in 2004 and worked in BC for 15 years, returning here not too long ago and having the great pleasure of joining Laura and the team here at Alberta Innovates. I did that because I've got an 11-year-old granddaughter, and I want her to have the opportunities that this province presented to me and to my generation. And I think the decisions that we're making today will help pay that forward. So with that, over to you, Leann.
Thanks, Lyn.
Thanks. Perry told me we didn't need to present anything, so I'm just going to wing it like the last two.
Great.
So I too am a born and bred Albertan, third generation, I think. Grew up on an acreage north of Nemeo, if any of you know where Namao is, because it's just north of Edmonton, but grew up in an acreage, and you know, so I took a bus, and never ever thought I would, you know, anything would come up, anyone from Namao. But I ended up taking university in Edmonton, U of A, grad political science, and then moved to Calgary, take social work actually. And my father said, "You'll never be a social worker." And I said, "Okay, Dad, see you later." And he's right. I was never a social worker, but I took a community development stream, not a clinical. At the end of that, we did practicums. I ended up in the mayor of Calgary's office. He was actually an alderman at the time. He said, "Hey, you're graduating. You want to come work with me?" And I'm like, "Yo, you kidding me?" And so then he said, "Oh, I'm running for mayor. You want to, if I win, you want to come with me?" I'm like, "Mm-hmm." So I worked for him. His name was Al Dewar. Worked for him for 12 years. And my portfolio was the external piece. It was community and economic development. And I never left the field. I fell into this field. I've been captivated by it. I kept thinking I'm never going to, you know, I want to be in something else, but it keeps sucking me in. I've been running the economic development group since 2009. It's a contract. And that's where obviously Perry and I got to know each other with this survey. And we've talked for a number of years saying, well, maybe there's a fit here. Maybe we can help move this along. And one of the things that you know, I think back, one of the things I really learned in the mayor's office was he would specifically go to social audiences. And this, Lynn, when you were talking, I thought of this. He would specifically go to a social audience and talk about business. And he would specifically talk to a business audience about social issues. And that to me was a very interesting communication lesson. And I continue to do that lesson today. In fact, we just had our summit a couple of weeks ago. And I kind of find it funny, but it's not. I mean, I am a huge supporter of the oil industry. The energy industry has built this province. I will never take potshots at it. Do we need to do things differently? Yes. Are we doing things differently? Yes. Can we do it faster? Perhaps. Like all of those things. But there's a number of people who just, it's like a zero sum. There's no more energy, none, zero, zip, no fossil fuels. And so I actually put some content on our conference together saying, let's look at everything. I want to hear your opinion and I want to hear yours. And if there's a little bit of friction, that's okay. Because if we're not talking, we're never going to get anywhere. And my challenge to some of the groups that I talked to, I said, you know, if you don't engage half the population or a third of our economy in solutions, I don't see how that's a good approach. Like, I think you need all the best and the brightest at the table figuring things out. And so we actually, 2 years ago, we started, and it was just before COVID, actually it's a year or so ago, wanted to put together the Alberta Economic Development Leaders Summit. Because I'm sitting there looking at all these different groups doing stuff in the area, but nobody's really coming together to talk about what can we collectively do. And then COVID hit, and then that kind of discussion had to take place. And I feel like a couple of weeks ago, we started that. And Justin, you can say, you know, if you felt similar, I don't know, but I just felt like here we're bringing all these different diverse groups together, industry groups, government organizations. We partnered with AUMA, the Rural Municipalities of Association, all these different parties that we've kind of bumped into over the years, but we've never really collaborated. And so to bring them all in one room, to start talking about the same things, to talk about each industry and saying, so where are we today? More importantly, my challenge was them, where are we going tomorrow? And how can we do that together? And I think that discussion is just starting. And my goal is I want to keep doing that. I want to do that next year again in April. I want to keep bringing together diverse people, everybody who believes in this province in some way. And it might be a social group and it might be a CAP. Like, I quite frankly don't care. But if you put our province first and where we're going as number one and willing to work with others who we may not see 100% eye to eye, but that's not the point. The point is we want to move forward. So that's, you know, kind of that Alberta economic development piece. And I think it was maybe Justin talked about the vision piece. I feel that we have to do that. We have to start talking more. We have to force those collaborations. The other thing because I was kind of a Calgary promoter for many years in my previous life, and now an Alberta promoter, I've always been promoting. But sometimes I look and I see, sometimes we just talk. Sometimes we actually have to act here. We keep talking about how good we are, but then we go compete with someone and we lose because we have to be better. And I think that that's part of our challenge too, is really kind of reducing all of the bureaucracy and just reducing the time from concept to commercialization, like all those things, because it is a very competitive world. And we do have what it takes, but we got to get a bit of a fire under our butts. And I think that COVID probably did some of that. So I'll stop there. I could talk about this forever, but I think that's enough.
Thanks, Leann. That's really insightful. And I think about my days when I was in the private sector and in a particular industry, and the need for not just one province to work unto itself, although I worked for a long time for one province, that in fact economic development is a regional thing. And the study we have is regional. It says that the attitudes are different throughout the province, but my experience tells me that Western Canada is really the region that our industry and our people are going to thrive in and reach beyond that, maybe, and maybe not. And so my question to all three of you is, should the kind of survey that we've been doing, should it stretch and cover all of Western Canada, or is that swallowing too big a challenge, or would it create more baffle-gab? So the question is, are we really talking about something that we can address as a province, or in today's world where you have global value chains and so on and so forth, do we need to be an economic unit that has a whole bunch of stuff in common and be working together towards end goals that are common and shared throughout the West? And maybe Leann, you can start from the municipalities' thoughts around those areas, and
Sure. Well, and when I was in the mayor's office, we did a thing called Prosperity South. And that was the first time it was meant Calgary was kind of bringing together Southern communities to work together on common economic development issues. And it kind of worked, but not really. And part of what the challenge was nobody trusted Calgary. They said, what are you really in it for? And why are you really talking to us? And I found that a little bizarre. But I mean, I think there is this Edmonton-Calgary thing, and then everybody else. And I hear that even at our meetings, like there are people in rural Alberta that just feel like, oh yeah, Edmonton, Calgary, get everything. We got nothing. And so from a regional perspective, yeah, of course it makes sense for them to work as regional collaboratives. Like you look at the RETAs, so we have a number of regional economic development alliances. So say some of them are very strong. Like you've got one in Southern Alberta, Alberta Southwest, Bev Thornton, for those of you who might know her. It's 33 communities working together on shared projects, because not all of them have what it takes to be competitive, but I might have a little bit of something and you might have a little bit of something. If we bring it all together, we actually have something we can sell. And so, I think for smaller communities, definitely it's something that is beneficial to them. You look at what's happening in Edmonton, the Edmonton Global Group. Hopefully that will work, but I think that's, Justin, maybe you can tell me, I think it's 13 communities working together. And so, but
over
it's
20, I think.
Oh, is it 20? Okay.
Yeah,
and sharing taxes.
Yeah. So I hope it works, because, when you look at we need to get our head out of the sand in a way, because we're competing with Houston and Dallas and all these other external entities for certain types of investment. So it's smart of us to pool resources. And at the end of the day, I mean, the problem is, I want your taxes. So if you go across the border, like to the other community, I don't get your taxes. But you know what? I might get the people who work in your community to live in my community or to buy something from my community. So the ripple effect can be, go quite far. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think from a municipal standpoint, it's important to work as regions. As a province, we can collaborate together. I don't know how the survey would resonate in other places. I can't speak to that.
I'll comment on that when Justin and Lyn are finished.
And I'll move to Justin, seeing so your mandate now, your department's mandate is exactly that. I don't want to put you on the spot because you're not representing all of WD, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, and I completely agree with what Leann has said. I think the more important question is, it depends on what you're trying to achieve in terms of the survey. Because I think there are some policy issues that need to be run at a regional level where you need more support beyond just Alberta or pockets within Alberta to achieve those things. I think we have a lot of alignment with Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and some with BC, but BC's economy is becoming more and more distinct in many areas. I mean, there's Vancouver and then there's the rest of BC as well. What I've been amazed with, and all of you I'm sure can appreciate this, is, the parochialism that we've had. It's not just endemic to Alberta. I think it's part of human nature, but the Edmonton Calgary thing that we've all grown up with. And awakening for me about 10 years ago was we were fighting over how much we need here, there, and everywhere. Is what are we doing? Alberta's no greater population wise than the city of Seattle. Who do we think we are that we need, one thing here, one thing there, one in Edmonton, one in Calgary, all of that kind of stuff that just inundates provincial governments. And in so many ways, we need to band together because we're fighting a global race. We're not fighting a race between, Saskatchewan and Manitoba. But a lot of times politically, it's very difficult to get alignment if one government comes in place provincially, say in Manitoba versus Alberta, and then there's just no collaboration that you get to see for a 4-year term because of the political circumstances. So I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve from a policy perspective. Incidentally, I don't know how many of you know WD's splitting up. As of this last budget, we're actually working. So we're going to have a BC agency, an independent BC agency, and then WD is going to remain with Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. So now the federal government's recognizing BC's different. And you could ask, well, why doesn't Alberta get its own? Well, then we should create one for every province, right? So I'm actually quite happy with where we're going because it means more funding for us in terms of the decision. And that's really what counts at the end of the line. But I think there's a number of things we can collaborate with on Western Canada and have, but there's also things we could do specifically in the prairies or in Alberta.
Thank you. Yeah, Lyn, if you could.
So I'll just add one quick point. I mean, like the Economic Development Association, we too, have regional innovation networks. So we recognize that within Alberta, there are microeconomies, so to speak. But we're also of the view that technologies are platforms that really make us, in some respects, region and industry agnostic. So, as the backbone of Alberta's entrepreneurial ecosystem, you don't see us necessarily all the time, but you see the results of what it is that we are involved with in the successful launches, the successful ideas. And I would just, reinforce what others have said. Innovation happens everywhere, but for us in Alberta to set aside our in-province sort of rivalries and maybe they're not even rivalries, but when you were a province that had very deep pockets, it's easy not to have to pool resources. And it's easy to see a proliferation of 23,000 non-governmental organizations or whatever, each of which is performing a really important service to society. I think in more difficult times, and the pandemic has laid some of that bare, the value of learning to cooperate and to rapidly identify, which we did in Alberta at the start of the pandemic when we rallied along with everyone to support COVID research projects right here, everything from prevention to clinical trials. Again, the pandemic made it clear that there is value in rapid cooperation, if I can say it that way, and that there's also value in being able to map where the strengths are, where the gaps are, and it also laid bare how little we know about the intricacy of the value chains and supply chains that underpin economies worldwide. So yes, I think it's valuable, as Justin has said, but it really depends on what you're looking to accomplish. And being Alberta, I would say, coming together as Albertans is kind of the first step to higher impact regional performance from an innovation ecosystem that serves the country as a whole.
As I said, Barry, I'd like to intervene here, maybe give you a little bit of color regarding the survey and its reach. The survey would be enhanced in value for sure by bringing in other jurisdictions, if for no other reason than for comparative purposes, so we could see what's working and what's not, based on different policy positions, et cetera. So certainly it would increase complexity, but I think it would add value. We have attempted that. Leann was quite helpful in introducing me to the Ontario Economic Developers. And they were keen to get involved, which would have given us an Ontario reach. But there was something very interesting, and I've commented on this before, and it comes back to something that Lynn and Justin have both referenced. Ontario and Alberta appear to be different. It shouldn't be a surprise to any one of us. And in fact, Edmonton and Calgary are different. We may not like the word rivalry, but they are different. They've got somewhat different cultures, and that was referenced in a recent article in the Financial Post that I think we all saw this morning, where they talked about how the oil and gas industry has as a foundation very strong entrepreneurship, and how so many people laid off have bounced back. Calgary, as illustrated in the survey, is in fact different than Edmonton. And that's not a negative, that's called diversity. I think we're all saying we want to embrace diversity. The fact that Edmonton and Calgary may have different economies is reflective not only of their culture, but also access to resources, the distribution systems that have been established over 100 years. I mean, each one of them needs to recognize what they have in common, but also what they have that's different and complementary. When I do the analysis on the survey, I take into consideration 20 different regional perspectives. In fact, there were so many that I needed to cluster them, and I clustered those around industry as different from those around professions, as different from those around public services. They are different, those three sectors, in terms of what governs them, what affects them, and how they react to it. Diversification and resilience appear to be strongest when we've got a healthy diversity within the industrial sector and not an over-reliance on public sector services. The public sector services may tend to mediate some of the shocks, but the reality is in the long haul, they're not wealth creators. But coming back to the survey for a moment, one of the differences between Ontario and Alberta that was clearly apparent when we were beginning to put the survey together is their interest in economic diversification was a lot less than what we saw in Alberta. And possibly for reasons that we see when government reacted not at all to what was happening when Calgary laid off 100,000, but jumped to the pump when Oakville let off 10,000. Ontario was very much interested in social issues, in ESG, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Edmonton's interested very much in ESG, and Calgary has become interested in ESG as we've seen Shell and Esso being affected by attempts by activists to increase their representation on the board, and the government in Denmark, or I guess it was in the Netherlands, taking a strong position against Shell not being necessarily corporately responsible. There's something going on in Canada and something going on in Alberta around ESG that is bridging the economy. ESG, for those that don't know it, is simply the short form of environmental, social diversity, and the implications for corporate governance, and maybe for governments in general. There's something going on in the social sector that is transitioning and having an impact on the economic sector. And for those that think capitalism is dying, it isn't dying, it's adjusting. And I think what Alberta is probably on the edge of, and I just recently learned that Brad Ferguson has been hired as an ADM of ESG by the Alberta government, clearly an indication that government wants to learn more and learn how to make the adaptations in a very dynamic time and a very dynamic province. My hat's off to Alberta Innovates, if for no other reason than its recognition that we need networks. The dynamism and the new technologies that are emerging do not have old networks around them as chambers of commerce do that are established locally. And technologies do not have borders. And so the putting of networks together around things like the relevance of nuclear, the emergence of fission, the revitalization of the nuclear industry. Those are worthy networks to better understand how does that affect our economy. So the fact that Alberta Innovates has put such a strong focus on network development is hats off to them. I think that is so critical at a time of rapid change, to the extent that they get to learn who one another are, and when affected, can react quickly and nimbly. So Lynn, pass the word on that we said some good things today about Alberta Innovates. Also, I could say some other things, but this isn't the time. No, I think you've been, well, you saw in the survey that there are things, it's weak. That doesn't mean it's bad. I think what we're seeing is continued growth and continued progress on something that has been weak, including our economic resilience. That's not a bad thing. That means we need development. Your jobs are secure as long as we stay below 3 on that scale of 1 to 5. So I brought to the table the ESG issue. You might want to comment on it. I think it's new. I don't think people are well aware of it. I think we run the risk of becoming bipolar and seeing that it's either social or it's economic, not that it's both, and how do we balance it?
To follow up on the chat topics, and we'll come back to the ESG in a minute, but to follow up on the chat, the digital economy fits all of these things going forward. Justin, you and I, when we worked together, comparing Ontario and Alberta, the Ontario economy was way more dependent on the automobile than the Alberta economy was dependent on energy. Now, having said that, that's hard to believe. Nobody recognized it in those days, and I'm sure it's probably still the same way. There's all of these different...
Ontario, I think what's going on in Toronto in the last 10 years has been a massive impact on the overall economy in Ontario.
Yeah.
I don't think automobile holds the weight that it once did.
Well, I'm not current, so that it's a good example. But on the digital economy, there's questions around what we should be learning from surveying and how we should be putting it out to the populace at large. Justin, do you want to take a bit of a
Sure.
run at that? And
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Barry. So I think many of you have a lot more experience around what's been going on in the digital economy than I in the past little while. But what I see, I'm really excited about. We've been able to double our venture capital in this province. And you remember for how long we've been whining in this province that we don't get enough venture capital. Now, venture capital has gone up everywhere because of COVID and digital and so forth. But there are truly some amazing, not just startups, but scale-ups going on the tech side that I think is unprecedented in this province. And we need to all start understanding what they're about and telling that story and getting out. That's something I'm very focused on. We do short little videos at WD talking about the companies. And we actually get to, in WD, invest in these companies now, which is very exciting from an economic developer, because for years, public policy was government, thou shalt not invest in these companies. And I'll tell you why I'm excited that we get to invest. We get to bridge the financing gap that currently exists for a lot of scale-up companies in this province. They use our no-interest loan financing to leverage other financing to scale up, to add new staff, get into new markets, buy new machinery. And we've had a lot of unicorn successes in this province. So think about Adabotics, Benevity. You should really look up some of these companies because it's fascinating what's going on. And most people don't realize the great success we're having on the digital side in Alberta. So that's one thing that gives me some hope about our economy. The problem with our digital companies, they're not sticky. They're not sticky like oil and gas companies. So if they want to leave, they can leave. And it's not that hard for them to leave. And you think about us all in this virtual world. So one of the things we're concerned with is, how do we retain these companies and make sure they grow and flourish here? Alberta is littered with stories of digital companies, tech companies that have started here, couldn't get the venture capital, got it in the US, moved to the US, and have created the economic wealth in the US. One of the other reasons I'm excited about why we get to invest in these companies, our financing is keeping companies here. I'll give you a good example. We invested in an internet service provider support company called Sonar. You should look it up on the website. That is actually based out of DeBolt, Alberta, little DeBolt, 100 people. The guy that runs the company is based out of there. He hires people all over the world and has hired, I think they're over 150, 200 people now. He told me directly that if WD hadn't invested in him, they would have gone to the States because they didn't have a reason to tell their venture capitalists that there was a notion or a reason for actually remaining inside Canada. But with federal government support, financing, it gave them a reason to maintain their headquarters and their supports within Alberta. So I think we need to start really seriously considering that. I'm not advocating for a whole bunch of government investment into private sector. I think we do it in strategic instances where there's gaps within the financial system. But the digital area is an area of progress that we need to leverage. We're short on tech talent right now, a huge problem. And if we can't get that talent, the companies are going to go elsewhere. So there's a lot of things we could talk about, but I'm sure Lynn can say a lot more on this as well as Leann.
Lynn, you're up.
Okay, so I think actually Justin covered it pretty well. All I would add to that is we've got an accelerator RFP out right now that is really aiming at that scale up gap. So lots of startups. And then, the inability to keep them at home is what, we're looking at addressing in terms of that piece of work. On the digital side, I would just say, digital had its start in some respects back in the days of AI and machine learning, so AI ML. And we know that Alberta does have strength in that area. It was a long kind of runway to where Amy is right now. And I think the accelerator RFP and others is just recognizing that maybe 40-year investments before you reach that kind of scale that Alberta and other regions are looking to capitalize on quickly is something that we need to address. And part of addressing that is that complementary work around investing in the acceleration of great ideas on the data digital side that may be transforming agriculture, might be transforming energy, could be transforming municipal services, contributing to the resilient city, cities movement in so many different ways. So it really is a cross-cutting platform play. And we've got a great capability around all those are scientists who may not be necessarily working in the petroleum industry any longer, but their ability to work in the data sphere and apply it in a new way for the benefit of this new economic opportunity is something we really want to work and are concentrating on bringing to fruition more quickly through initiatives like the accelerator RFP.
Emphasis, when it announced that it's bringing 1,000 jobs to Calgary, made explicit reference to the strength that they found in the labor from the University of Calgary and SAIT. And I thought, getting an outsider coming to Calgary, Alberta, Canada, wherever the hell that is when you're looking at the world at large, because we had something so unique on a global scale like what University of Calgary and SAIT offer. I mean, the same argument, of course, should be extended to University of Alberta and NAIT, and maybe we've got a way to go yet to get them the profile that apparently Calgary has been able to get for its assets. But there's another thing going on in Calgary that I find intriguing, and I'm seeing evidence of it in Edmonton as well, and it's bottom up. And that's the pooling of private capital. Not the pooling of private capital for Esso and Synovus and Syncrude, but for local entrepreneurial initiative. And this is exactly what we're looking for. If there is, as Todd Hirsch has said and noted, and I've written about this, there's $1 trillion that's going to get released into the economy. If the voracious appetite of government to pay off debt is what I think it is, we're in trouble, because they're going to spot that $1 trillion as a quick fix to the debt, and may even be popular for youth. But we've got to find ways to incent my generation, the baby boomers, that if you don't get on with it and recognize the value of getting that wealth placed so it's a benefit for your kids in the economy, not waiting for a bureaucrat to do it, with all respect, Justin, but for individuals of my age, with my experience, to get involved as mentors, as angels, and building of those local networks, not just for talking, but for actually having some fun, building and contributing by giving back to their community, not even locally, regionally. I've never had so much fun taking the experience of my career and the data that I get from the surveys. And people may ask, I mean, Barry said it, anticipate a question. You must be doing this for a job or for some wealth. Well, not directly, but I'm sure getting a lot of good information about what's working and what's not, and where to place my kids' future with how I place my investments. And that's through networks and through the survey and through these discussions. This is fun. I hope more people of my generation wake up to the fact that it's not golf, gardening, and grandchildren. There's a lot more to be had by staying involved without somebody is telling what you do from 9 to 5. I do what I want to do, and this is what I've always liked doing. So when you ask, why do I do this? Because it's fun. So Lynn, I'm looking at you while I say this, because I think that's what Alberta Innovates is picking up on. And Leann, I think you see among the economic developers at the municipal level, they must be picking up that there are people out there today that are twiddling their thumbs looking for opportunities that aren't just the Chamber of Commerce and putting the lights on for the local economy, but thinking bigger. And Justin, you must be picking up on the fact that we need incentives for certain parts of our population in order that they get engaged. There's a lot of that in the US and maybe not enough in Alberta and in Canada.
I'm going to ask all of you to think about bringing you back to the survey and think about how we can improve it and use the chat. And while I'm doing that, or while you're doing that, I'm going to ask, and I don't apologize, Brian, for doing this to you, but I'm going to ask Brian, because when he's from our generation too, Perry, and he has gone off in a field that is healthcare, and from an Alberta base, and not what you're doing, but how were you able to do what you're doing from an Alberta base in healthcare equipment and technology, and take advantage of COVID and so on and so forth, because we haven't touched on healthcare and it's a huge industry for us. So Brian, just a couple of minutes about what you've struggled with and what you found easy.
Well, I'd say thank you, Barry, but you know, putting me on the spot. And by the way, I'm not the same generation as you, Barry. I'm way younger than you. But
well, I know that. I know that.
But no, and great conversation and today, and I really enjoyed the discussion we've had so far, and looking at it from a totally different perspective from my old days, so like Barry and Justin in government, and now in the private sector and trying to do startups. And I think I'm involved in 4 startups right now, so in various roles. So it's a challenge. There's no question. All the points that have been made are very, very valid. And a couple that Leann, you mentioned, like the new definition for partnerships. We have found that. Like we have a totally different definition of partnerships. Ours is global. It doesn't matter where we're starting from, whether the company's starting here in Alberta or where it's starting, it's global, because we have no other choice, because everybody we're up against is global. If you're thinking anything other than global, you're dead on arrival. And I think that's one of the challenges we have to get past in Alberta, is defining that it's not about whether it's Edmonton or Calgary. Guess what? one company, Barry mentioned our healthcare company. Guess what? I live in Edmonton. Our company's headquartered in Calgary. Who the heck cares? And we're partnered with our 2 main partners. One's in the States and the other's in England. We don't care. And when we joke about where our headquarters is, the answer is yes, because we have staff all over the world. We have manufacturing multiple places in the world. We don't care. And I think we in Alberta have to get past that, defining that this has to be Alberta. And again, Leann, you made the point about maybe we get to keep a piece of it, and we are. And it's a nice size piece. It's not everything. In this world, it ain't going to be everything. If you're going for all or nothing, which I forget who mentioned that. I think it might have been Lyn who mentioned that all or nothing attitude that we seem to have. If you've got that attitude, you're dead. And that's all there is to it. And I just wanted to quickly mention, really appreciate where you guys, you may get a contact from us on the venture capital thing, and trying to support companies at different phases now, and investing in companies. I hope that we're getting past the old days when I was in government, where we had the attitude is that we didn't pick winners and losers. So we gave everybody a little bit of money just to keep their operations going, and nothing happened. We have to pick winners and losers, and hopefully we're picking mostly winners. And I'm glad to see that that's happening, particularly on the tech and digital side. I think that's exactly where we need to be. It's happening big time everywhere. And we have the resources here, and we can keep a lot of our people here, if there's that attitude of it's a global company, you can be anywhere and you can be contributing. So congratulations, everyone. I think a great conversation. We're definitely talking about the right things from my new world and on the other side of the fence and trying to get some of these companies up and going. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Brian. Who else would like to ask a question, make a comment? We've got 15 minutes to go.
I'd like to pick up, Barry, on something you alluded to that Brian didn't touch on that I think is germane. It was Justin who used the word transformation early on, and I don't think there's any disagreement that Alberta is going through some transitions, particularly specific to the energy industry, but not exclusively. I mean, there are changes going on in agri-foods and agriculture that are massive, that are changing planning patterns and planning cycles and new relationships. We're seeing forestry. I mean, what the wheat, meat, fiber, oil, and gas industries, all in Alberta, are commodity-based and are going through changes because there's supply occurring also on a worldwide basis. So we're asking whether we should do more value-added, more manufacturing, and finding markets for them. But the sector we haven't touched on, and I'd like to know if there's a transformation pending or transformation needed, and that is in public services. I'm of the view, and it's echoed, I believe, in the survey, that Canada has been in a building phase. And we have built in the last 100 years a health system and an education system and government as well. Phenomenal growth in municipal government in this country in the last 100 years. But without being offensive and saying when is enough, I mean, there's a point in a building phase where you focus on adequate supply, and then you begin to transform into becoming more focused on the individual for which the systems were built in the first place, which is the client, the patient, the student. It's called personalization. That's the word that I'm using. And I'd like to know whether or not there is a transformation underway, probably fueled by what's possible now with the digital economy, to personalize the services which for so long were dominated by the interests of the supplier. Anybody want to pick up on this? Dennis, Vincent, if you're there, you might want to as a doctor, but public services, that's what
I can provide. John Sproul from the Institute of Health Economics. That's what we work in all the time. And certainly we've been very thankful for Justin's support for us in trying to be a bit of the snake oil sniff detector on things and to kind of assess in a kind of a credible way the value of and put a bit of a gold stamp on some businesses that have been able to have some rigorous assessment. And I think for ones you're able to weed or adjust them early on, or if they get a kind of a evaluation that's pretty strong, it can be an asset that they can carry with them in their business development going forward. I do think the point you make, Perry, is a big transformation that's occurring in health right now. And it's been a long, and having grown up in health, it's always been, it's the Donna Bedian, if you ever, there was a textbook that Donna Bedian wrote, this famous article, and it all had to be about needs-based assessment of healthcare, in which you basically, we fund what you need, we don't fund your wants, and your needs are determined by somebody who's an expert. Some clinical doctor will tell you what you need, and that's been a bit of the supply-driven, expert-driven healthcare. And we're actually having to adjust the system where, frankly, we're going to have to give more tailoring, and what people want needs to be legitimately supplied and much more adaptable. How we fit that into what can be collectively paid for, what we're going to allow people to purchase for themselves while kind of not affecting equity and dealing with, you know, that we're all in this together. So I think collectively, those very necessary services, we should share collectively and not allow people to kind of queue jump. But there's increasingly a move much more to personalized and tailored services. And we've certainly found through COVID an ability to deliver services in a dramatically different way through different providers. And I know that there's a lot of talk going now, well, maybe if we delivered things virtually through, say, non-physician providers and people did it for themselves, like maybe we should find a way to to keep that situation. So there's a lot of practices which happened in COVID that you want to maintain. There's also going to be some stuff of where things were delayed that shouldn't have been. But I think it was a useful crisis for innovation in the healthcare system that I hope we don't waste. But also we're having to manage much more towards person-centered, patient-centered approaches, and it's becoming, for all sorts of reasons, our ability to be personalized through genetic testing and all those kind of things is really important. My only other comment is there's a lot of snake oil in the personalized health IT space of a lot of useless stuff being thrust on individuals, like those 10,000 apps you get on your phone. Sometimes people just need a web browser, an email, and their phone. So we have to be cautious in how we deliver it. But there's big transformation underway, I think.
John, this was outstanding. I haven't met you, or I think only online, and it's heartening to hear the awareness of those in the system that this change is underway. When I was director of privatization for the province, not as an ideology, but as a management option, I said to the province when I was leaving, you don't need policy for privatization. The market will pull you there. And I think what we're seeing today with the availability through the digital economy, and what people are now with their wearables and with new products that are coming on all the time with a focus on the market, and that is what individuals want versus what they're allowed to have, is a radical change. I mean, absolutely radical. And I think it will be shaking up the professions from law to engineering. It already is, into health and into education. It's going to be transformative, and it's not going to be easy because there's a lot at stake in interests that want the status quo.
And I do think, just as I was listening to today, which was really interesting, is one, I do think, and Justin's been very good about moving towards figuring out the development of platforms, not projects. So what are some platforms that we can, through kind of shared support, that can enable an environment where creativity can happen and thrive? And personally, I come a bit from a theater background. Just, one of the best examples, I think, is the Fringe Theater event, where there's an infrastructure that allows you to have a theater and some technicians, and they help with those systems. And then you go out and you sell your show, and they flop, and some fail, and some are successful. But those kind of environments and labs where you allow creativity to kind of occur and allow both successes and failures to thrive, is where I think you really need to have that focus, rather than dealing with trying to develop projects. So I'm a fan of platforms.
Thanks, John.
Okay.
And Perry, I'm going to turn it over to you in about 3 minutes to bring closure so that we can be done by 3:30. I'd like to comment on everybody's patience and the participation and how the discussion has gone. We need to bring it back, Barry, to the question at hand. Is the survey worth it, and should we move forward? But I'd also like to just touch on one thing that's on the chat, which is the struggle that some on the line are having, and I'm not sure who would like to answer this. Maybe it's Justin again, but what small investments can we make to produce big returns for Alberta? Anybody want to answer that one for the questioner? And Leann, do you have anything? Maybe the three presenters could take a bit of a run at that question. And then Perry, do you want to close things down for us? Thank you.
I can kick that off, Barry, if you like. I'm not going to tell you
Okay.
which companies to invest in.
No.
I have liability insurance for that.
Yeah.
But one of the things we've been trying to grow, and Perry alluded to it earlier, is the angel capital network, right? So sort of the under $500,000 investment. We have some in Alberta. We need much more. We got a lot of deep pockets in Calgary in particular from the oil and gas and so forth that have struggled to find comfort in investing in other sectors like health, like digital, and so forth. And one of the things we've been trying to do is invest in angel investor training. And we have brought in NACO, the National Angel Capital Association, to do more of that. There's a burgeoning ecosystem where you're finding some well-seasoned oil and gas executives beginning to put their money where their mouth is, and also their mentorship. And that was another point I wanted to bring up. I've seen amazing things in the past 5 years in Calgary's innovation ecosystem, largely because there's business leadership. There's entrepreneurs, seasoned entrepreneurs who are willing to give back, willing to invest their own dollars, willing to provide their own mentorship in their own time. Creative Destructive Labs is probably the best thing we've done as an accelerator incubator within Alberta in the past while. And it's because there's seasoned business leadership, largely from Calgary, that's investing their time and their money. We need more of that. We don't have much of that at all in Edmonton, and we need to generate more of that here to see this ecosystem grow. And it's about business talent investing back in and giving back into the community. There's a handful, but we need much more. So that's something. So if you were interested in that angel and investor training, we can certainly provide some links to different groups that do that as a way to get you started.
Thanks, Justin. Leann, how about at the municipality level in very small businesses that are startups and maybe have been around and are changing generations and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I think, from one perspective, you've got the small businesses. Personally, from my opinion, I think there's a ton of resources out for startups. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see a lot of people willing to take that midpoint scale piece, because I've had a lot of companies come and say, I can't find anything. There's tons for startups. I'm proven. I've gone to the School of Hard Knocks. I need to scale. I can't find Canadian investors, especially in the healthcare field. They're going to the States. So that's something that concerns me, because that's talent leaving. The one thing too, I think, Justin, you touched on it with the season's business leadership. I've just personally been working with a company myself. It is a business, they're looking at a US location. When they went there, there was a business leader who brought every single potential service deliverer to the table for one call to say, if you come to our location, you have all the brains around the table right now. You need utilities, here's the person. You need tax incentives from the States, here's the person. All of this, and they were a champion. I don't believe we have that in our province, and I think that's a big gap. That's a personal feeling, because when I go to different groups, they're kind of like, yeah, it's not really my role. It's someone else's. Yeah, well, I got other things to do today, so it's not really a pressing priority. If you turn some of that around to, I'm the business and I need you to service what I want. You want me to come to your community? Then you better prove it to me, because there are others who are doing a bang up job in that regard. I think the other thing too is, I just think some of these communities, especially rural, you talked about turning over succession planning, huge issue. I think, Perry, you talked about it too. Investing in the future, where are you going to put your money? Succession planning for some of these farmers in the ag industry, big issue. You're just going to close your door, or are you going to sell your business? So that's just a few things that I can think of.
Thank you. Lyn, do you have a
quick point on that. If you haven't connected with our technology development advisors who are associated with the RINs, and to follow up on Leann's point, they are there to make those connections happen. Now, truly, there is a scale-up gap. That accelerator process that's underway and that CDL has done a great job in Calgary with. We need more of that, but at a local or at a regional level, connect with the TDAs, at least to start.
Thank you. And Perry, it's all yours. It's been my pleasure and honor to be able to participate. And Perry, you can put a bow on it.
Well, as it was difficult to put recommendations together from the survey, even though it's only a 7-point survey, it generates enormous information, and by region and by industry. And so it will be difficult to sort of put a wrap up for this session. This was not meant, this was meant as much as a continuation of research. Because we don't have the opportunity very often to confer with those who are often advocating about. And to hear from Justin and to hear from Lyn and to hear from Leann and to have heard from all of you over the last couple of months, I haven't heard denial. I mean, I come into this with recommendations having laid out, and you're putting your neck out a mile when you put, it's one thing to put data out and put a weather report. It's another one to put recommendations out and then put your neck on the line and listen. And I didn't hear denial today. In fact, what I heard was further elaboration. And I'm going to note, these are my notes. I was delighted to hear that public procurement can be looked at as a vehicle to set out challenges rather than a lot of administrative processes to advance social and economic agendas. I really, really hope, Justin, that can be, the experience you're having can be shared, because it's exactly what we need at this time. We don't need more bureaucracy around administration. And we heard that from administrators as well as from contractors. So good on you, spread it around, because in the survey, people were reluctant to endorse public procurement as an economic entity because of the way it's been practiced in the past. Secondly, on the survey itself, it's heartening to hear it. I see no reason why we should stop it. It would be delightful to have more participants. The survey could be enriched by having more participants, and I don't mean necessarily more jurisdictions, though having Ontario would be nice. I need more presence from northern, southern, and central Alberta. The rural data that we have is okay. And we see the rural distinctiveness between southern Alberta with what's going on in agriculture and manufacturing, and northern Alberta with forestry around the Grand Prairie area, and some of the pain that Fort McMurray is going through, and how exciting it is to be in central Alberta right now with manufacturing and agriculture as well. But we need more data from those particular sectors. So it's something I look for. And I'd also like to ask all of you to keep your eyes open. Is there someone that could take on operational responsibility for this survey? My wife asks that. I mean, this is fun. I love the data. I love this part of it. But you know, their day will come, and my barber tells me, and my doctor as well, that I'm not going to be around forever. And I think this thing has value and should find a permanent home. And so I reach out to all of you, and Barry has some ideas, and I'm aligned with looking around for a merger, an alliance, or a handover, just to keep this thing alive. I want to echo again what I heard from Alberta Innovates. Networking is key. We need networking around the investment side, and it's great to see that coming as a bottom up and support from the top, because we do need more angels. But angels don't flock. They tend to stay silent because they're a little nervous, because most of them are relatively early and have a limited amount of runway. And so they need help. They need to know who it is that they can trust. And they're not necessarily ready to work with government, but they are ready to work with their neighbors, and they need a facilitator, a way to get that together. TNT in Edmonton with Zach is doing it. And I know that Calgary is growing up. My advisors around Calgary said, yeah, there's a lot of billionaires, a lot of wealth in Calgary, but it was nouveau riche. It wasn't ready to get involved in sort of the economies they were unfamiliar with. So those networks in Calgary are working, they're coming together, but we need them desperately in Edmonton. Edmonton is different, and Edmonton needs help. I sat in a brief session with the city manager recently and getting good feedback that he's thinking regionally, as is Malcolm Bruce. And hopefully the municipalities are along with him. But we need help in Edmonton. Edmonton has strong interests on the social side of the agenda and much less understanding of the economic side. We are seeing a socioeconomic transformation where the social and economic sides are coming together. That's what ESG, I think, is meaning. You can't think economy without recognizing that there are issues about the environment, about social diversity, about governance that are going to affect the economy and vice versa. We need to start thinking not just about economics, but about socioeconomics. And I think that it behooves us to ignore any one of them. This is not a right-left NDP versus UCP. We have to work as a commons with socioeconomic objectives. And part of it is because the economy in Alberta is transitioning from raw commodities to becoming a service economy. And as a service economy, social issues becoming much more relevant than just economic alone. So that in itself is rethinking, is thinking differently. We are beyond supply. We are now thinking markets. And in
Perry, there's one thing that we missed, I think, and I take the blame. We brought up about diversity and inclusiveness, and then we didn't have any further discussion on that. I think we need to look at that as a component of our study.
This summer, and we're now into closure. We've pretty well now wrapped up the series. We'll issue final recommendations, and I don't see a lot of tweaking, maybe a lot of highlighting. But as we get into the summer, in conferring with those who come to the webinar routinely, I think we'll go to once a month for a webinar. Maybe go back to the chateau on other Fridays. And we'll continue with the newsletter. But the topic that's emerging that I think we need to start cultivating, and maybe even add a question into our survey, is around ESG, is around the relevance of environmental issues, issues of diversity, and issues of governance, corporate. I think we need to start talking about that. I think we need to raise awareness that this is not a left-right, this is not politics, this is what's going on in the market at large. So I take that away from this discussion today and some of the insights that the survey helped garner. So I thank all of you. I'd like to chat with you further, John Sproul, about some of what you're seeing, because that was heartening to hear that personalization appears to be recognized and alive and well. Certainly technology is going there. Justin, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to not see a bureaucrat, but to see somebody who wears care on his sleeve. Lyn, thanks for a little bit of your history and a recognition of the relevance of networks, and also the points that you made around ESG itself. And Lyn, I think the world of what you're doing, I mean, you're holding the tiger by the tail, working with all those different municipalities, but helping them to think regionally and provincially is a real kudo to your organization. And thanks, Barry. And thanks all of you for showing up today and making this credible and worth